曾几何时，性别与立场决定了一个人爱国的权利。乔治市嘉年华摄影展的撤照风波，两位性少数群体摄影人士妮莎阿玉和彭启德身披国旗的照片毫无预警遭撤下，让人不禁反思：自今年5月初政权交替之后，由希望联盟组成的政府，是否也为我国的性少数群体带来新希望？我国对性少数群体的包容似乎没有随着改朝换代迎来新气象。
Masyarakat Pondan ni kadang-kadang dilahirkan angry bird dia macam burung pipit. Dia dilahirkan macam tu, angry bird dia macam tu, kecil. So tak tahulah apa yang jadi. Saya tak mahu nak bercerita panjang pasal orang ingat macam saya pula duk berkawan dengan dia orang. Tapi sedikit sebanyak kita tahu。
虽然政府多次提及性少数群体身为公民，享有联邦宪法保障公民的同等权利，不应该受到任何形式的歧视。
Any citizen of Malaysia is free and cannot be discriminated in their workplace and in other issues.
但是在我国，要拥抱真正的多元主义，似乎还有很多里路要走。平权平等在马来西亚真的是天方夜谭吗？
各位观众朋友，大家晚上好，国庆日快乐！看过我们刚才的短片，大家就知道我们今天讨论的课题会是什么。在还没有开始我们今天的节目之前呢，再次提醒我们各位的观众朋友，如果你是第一次收看我们的节目，你可以在节目进行的过程当中呢提问任何问题。那我们的制作人在适合的时段呢，就会拿你的问题呢，就是由我来发问，让我们今天现场的来宾来一起就是来解答您的疑虑。那我们事不宜迟，就来展开我们今天的这一次的访问。Good evening, dear all.
Hello.
Happy Merdeka. Yeah, just a little bit of warm up. What were you guys doing this morning to celebrate Merdeka? Or, before you came here? It would be all right if you're sleeping,
I had brunch with my boyfriend's mother.
Yeah. Okay. That's like any other day.
Yes. But yes, once in a while.
But you wrote a very beautiful thing, a beautiful post on your Facebook today. I saw all about how, it has to be equal, whether Seksualiti Merdeka was founded 10 years ago.
It was
I read it.
2 hours ago.
Yes, I read it.
Okay.
I have to do my homework, right? Yeah, what about, okay, so you had your brunch.
Yeah, just, it's holiday, right? So a lot of people, they have other stuff to do, so it's time for me to do work.
Sorry?
It's time for me to do work that I have, do
Catch up
so
on
long.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
Well, okay. And you?
I caught up on work just like no one. So we are so we have work to do, and also I guess I was doing some gardening and transplanting some plants this morning. So
you know how people say that Malaysians are less productive because we have a lot of public holidays? I think maybe they have to consider otherwise because we tend to catch up with work on public holidays. Yeah.
It's depressing actually. Well, I mean, I also had to write that post because I thought it is Merdeka. It is the 10th anniversary of Seksualiti Merdeka.
Yeah.
I had to say something. I haven't had the chance to sit down properly and write it. So this afternoon, between brunch with boyfriend's mother and buying dinner for my father, I had to squeeze in this time to write this emo stuff about Seksualiti Merdeka. Yeah.
That's great, huh? You can be emo so easily. You can come in and out so easily.
I'm like the Hulk. I'm emo all the time. So.
I see. Okay, you guys are introduced to the show as activists, rights activists. So how? And also, in particular for the LGBT community, how did you come to pick this as your cause as an activist, personally? Okay, maybe you're so well known.
Me, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bang.
I can't say I picked it. Basically, I think because I spent at least 10 to 12 years of my life trying to become straight. I was a Christian and I was trying to become straight.
Okay.
And so a lot of time was spent suppressing my stories, my voice. And when I finally stopped trying and I felt there were so many stories to tell, I just wanted to tell everybody my story. And I started writing, also very emo stuff from the beginning. And then I was reading my stories in public, and then I realized that there are spaces that wouldn't allow me to speak, and there are not many opportunities given to this kind of stories. So we started to create more and more opportunities with different people to showcase our stories, because we felt that our stories are actually Malaysian stories as well, right?
Yes,
so we wanted to put it out there. And then I was running an art gallery at the time, called the Annex Gallery with Jerome and Chung Wei. And me and Jerome decided, you know what, we should use this opportunity that we have a space to start a festival. And it was actually just because we were lucky enough, being writers and also people in the arts, that we know a lot of people, Tilaga and a lot of women's rights activists who were already working on the LGBT issues, and bring them all together to create this festival together. I wasn't thinking that I was an activist. I don't know anything. I was just an organizer trying to bring people together. But they are so inspiring that, being with them just made me want to be an activist as well.
Ah, okay. So you're like such an accidental activist.
I'm really accidental. In fact, I think a lot of people still think I'm quite accidental. Yeah.
But it has been a decade.
Yes.
Yeah, 10 years. And you, Numan?
So when I returned from the UK in 2014, so I've always been working with another group that does progressive Islam discourse. So when you talk about progressive Islamic discourse, you have to talk about gender and you have to talk about sexuality. And they offer a sort of safe space for me, to explore that side of my identity. I'm free to talk about religion and sexuality, even though it's a very close group, right? And then, so back then I'm not an activist or just someone that's believe in more progressive, to reconcile progressive ideas and faith. But then I went to Pang's talk.
You're
that
an
was
inspiration, you see.
that was organized by Islamic Renaissance Front. It was 2 years ago.
Yeah. The one in Nottingham.
Yeah, Nottingham University.
Oh, that one.
Yeah. So after the forum, I hang out with some of my friends that went to the forum, and we're like, why don't we start something that a new group, right? Like youth-led group that
Because he's trying to say that we are too old.
No.
It's okay.
Because talking to the younger, the youth gang. Okay, that's
No,
very
not
bad.
really. It's just that because we a bunch of us are young people, right? So we started doing activities, and that's, I think we call it Pelangi, and I think that's why people come to know me as someone that advocate or active organizers for LGBT community. That was like 2 years ago, before birthday 5, I think, the last one. Yeah. 2016. Yeah.
I see. And Tilaga?
I started volunteering with different groups, but when I was a young person, and so that exposed me to like different communities. So I was volunteering at the Malaysian AIDS Council actually, and so I got to know people living with HIV, drug users, sex workers, gay men and trans people. So that really broadened my perspectives on just life, right? And then I started doing work on like different things, different types of activism, and then of course connected with people. Like I also met Pang at the Annex Gallery, while protesting and homophobic bans and all of that.
That was actually how I got to know Tilaga, because we were featuring a lot of bands, rock bands, indie bands in the gallery, and one of them was very famous for being homophobic, and so they weren't being homophobic at the event, I think, but they were known to be homophobic. So she came and hold signs, and then they were trying to. They were very unhappy with her, so they were trying to say, get ask her to get lost and all that, and then she started fighting back. I was like, oh my god, what's going on here?
So is this band still homophobic?
Oh, they are quite bad. Yes.
So I haven't been keeping up because I decided to I have other things to do. Clearly, deal with other homophobes. So I think, and also a part of it was also my own personal questions about gender. And, I was definitely as a child, very interested in just gender, right? As a social construct, as an identity, as a form of expression and all of that. So I think, my activism and my, just working with different communities has also really helped me understand myself and also expand my understanding of what gender is, not just from a theoretical perspective, but also from a lived experience perspective, I guess.
Okay. So we actually sort of have three representative from activists, from how you come about and how do you actually get involved and all those things. But you mentioned about having a space to express what you want to express. What you want to express. What do you think about this space now? How would you define this space? Is it much more expanded from when you first started, or it's actually narrowed from you first started?
Good question. Well, I mean, in the beginning we had a physical space, right? And I think a lot of people were also organizing things in their own NGOs, and we were also running events like readings at bars and clubs and things like that, and once even in the National Art Gallery. Then, I think after Seksualiti Merdeka was banned by the police in 2011, the idea of having a physical space became more challenging, and a lot of this activism then went online. But at the same time, I also feel that we have created more spaces for conversations. So a lot of people are more willing to talk about it. So they will create perhaps one forum in their seminar, or one particular speaker in their panel. So the spaces open up in different ways, I think more people now are trying to create these conversations in small ways, so that it's part of other conversations, and it makes us feel that it's not just the LGBT people talking among ourselves, but actually they've included us in different discussions. And I think, for me, what is really inspiring is that the Malaysian civil society on the whole has kind of embraced us and included us in their family. So in a sense, we feel very belong there, because a lot of conversations that they include us. And I think it's also partly because when we were starting out, we created spaces that included them as well. Like in the Annex Gallery, I always try to make the space affordable for other NGOs. So it's mutual, we even though we are denied spaces ourselves, we can still create spaces and opportunities for other NGOs. So I think in a sense, these kind of spaces have opened up.
So you think that the discourse about LGBT rights has actually gone a little bit mainstream? You're no longer a discourse between the people like you guys only. So but does it actually make your life better, or make this LGBT people's life better? I don't know. I mean, Numan, what do you think? You are a younger activist. You're stepped in a bit later. Are you guys? You have been inspired by what he has done, and do you think that among
or maybe
your
not?
friends...
That's why he has to do it.
It's hard. It's really hard to say, lah. I mean, of course, now you find your voice when we go to these courses, go all these events, and you find people like you in these spaces, right? So it gives you power, it gives you a sense of belonging, sense of who you are. So in a way, it's empowering you as a person. You know that you're not alone. In that sense, you know, it gives power to you. But as an organizer, for Pelangi, you know, the group that we run. So we haven't been doing any activities for the past year because a lot of our committee members, you know, they were afraid, they left the group, so it's really hard to organize this event. So
for Pelangi, right? It's strictly Muslim.
No, it's not.
No,
it's
it's
actually
not.
It's a youth-led group, but it's open to public.
But why is the fear of people to actually identify themselves with the group? I'm not so sure. You say that people left or not participating or not engaging.
I think you have to explain from.
Okay.
So,
or Tilaga has something to.
No, after you.
Okay. So when we did our activities, our events, it's always been public on social media. So general public can come. It's not just the community. And then we for the first 12 months of our activities, they weren't any backlash. They weren't any reprisals against our activities. Yes. So only, you know, during Ramadan, you know, when we...
The iftar.
Yeah, the iftar happened. And then that's when you see, you know, even though it's a closed-door event and we do not publicize for that specific event, you see an increase of backlash. That's when some of our committee members left the group, you know, because they're fear for their safety. So that's what you know, for organizers, the spaces are shrinking.
So I have to agree with. I mean, I also see that we are having discussions. That there's a lot of narratives on LGBT people, on sexual orientation, gender identity now, right? But we also need to look at what are the types of narratives that are available and who is actually pushing out this narrative and who has ownership of these narratives, right? Because for example, you know, we did a media analysis, Justice for Sisters did a media analysis of LGBT related news in the month of July. In the month of July in 2018, we saw, you know, at least 225 articles in 10 media outlets, right? And out of this, let me just give 87 articles were in BM and 138 articles were in English, right? So you also see that, you know, and while one of the stark things that we found out of this analysis is the polarization of the kind of content that we see in the media, right? In the Malay media,
polarization with regards to language.
Yeah, okay. And the kind of content that we saw in all of these, right? So, for example, you know, I also like to say that, you know, Utusan Malaysia had the highest article, 38 articles in the month of July, so averaging at 1 article per day. And then Star and Malay Mail had 36 articles, so also averaging at 1 article per day, right? But the difference that we saw in terms of these articles is that in the BM articles, there were more, only in the BM articles did we find call for action, legal action against LGBT people. Whereas in the English articles, we did not see any of those. And in the English articles, English language articles as well, we saw a much wider representation of LGBT narratives. So meaning you had people like, you know, LGBT people themselves talking about their experiences. And we also had you know, allies or you know, Suhakam or politicians speaking about, you know, the issues in a positive, affirming way. You know, talking about grounding whatever that they're saying in the lived realities, right? So talking about discrimination and things like that. But in the Malay language articles, what we saw was, you know, most of it were, again, calling for action, and it wasn't represented by LGBT person themselves, but, you know, most of the people who were, you know, putting out these narratives were either, you know, politicians, you know, celebrity preachers, anonymous letters, and things like that. So, you know, and also in these articles, we saw a lot of promotion of rehabilitation, misconception,
Yes.
and things like that, right? So I think here one of the interesting things is that the kind of information that is going out to the public, right?
Yeah.
And how that is shaping the perception of people.
Mindset as well.
The mindset, right? And also just going back to like the spaces, right? I do think that, the spaces are shrinking. We've seen a trend of shrinking spaces, right? And this is related to the laws and policies that we have in place in Malaysia for LGBT, in relation to LGBT people. So for example, in the same year as the gay iftar thing happened, and also, there were also 3 other events that were cancelled.
Yep.
So one of it was a student event in a private university, and then one was a party that was supposed to take place, and then I can't remember the other event.
Penang.
The Penang film screening. So in each of these events as well, we saw an escalation of the state's response, right? The government's response. And we are seeing this continuing today as well, in the sense that, if you go online, you see so many hateful, degrading, violent comments towards LGBT people, as well as people who support the rights of LGBT people, right? So for example, if you are known as a supporter of like LGBT people or someone who speaks out on the issues, some of them have received some, degrading, hateful comments.
After this, you'll get it.
No, not that you're left out or anything. So it's not a
already,
competition as well.
really.
I got
don't
this
care.
many hate mails.
But I have
Every
friends
second,
stop
yeah.
befriending me because I support
Really?
very, very staunch
Aw.
Christians friends.
I'll give you a hug later.
Yeah, sure.
So so it's not just so homophobia and transphobia and this anti-LGBT sentiments. It's not only directed towards LGBT people, but also towards
Supporters.
Supporters.
and so this is also then making it very difficult for like people to express any kind of support or have, because people are careful, right? And this goes back to the fear that we are talking about, because a lot of these people online are also young people, right? As young people, you're just discovering your identities and you're like seeing all these things where like, you're laknat haram dosa, and this kind of so this is what Pang talks about, cultural criminalization, right? This then makes it even more difficult for people to like, love themselves.
Yes.
Appreciate themselves. And like, a lot of times...
At least, or just be themselves.
Exactly. So I think these things have such a huge impact on the well-being and mental health of young people and LGBT people. Yeah, go ahead. I'm so sorry.
No, I just want to jump in also because I think, to answer your question as well, that one of the clearest signs of the closing space is the fact that even our pictures cannot be up in an exhibition, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are trying to tell me, the banning of our images, the censorship of images have caused it to be more widely disseminated. They call it the Streisand Effect, right? And they're saying, oh, that's a good thing that has come out of it. Actually, I don't think so, because it's no longer just about the images being spread on the internet. The whole thing is, if you can think of it as a kind of performance by the state, So we are not only looking at the pictures now. If you pull back, what you're also saying is the picture has to be read now with the performance by the state of taking it down. Right? So you cannot think of the picture without thinking of the action of the censorship. So this action of the removal of the image from the public space and then leaving it on the virtual spaces has now become the only way people can think of LGBT stories and faces and representation in Malaysia. And what this does as well is it sanctions and endorses other people to do the same thing. People can now say, well, you know what, I think maybe we shouldn't push this LGBT person or this LGBT issue too much. We will scale back. They don't even need the state to tell them now. You see, because once they see this, they take it upon themselves to do the censorship, right? And this impacts a lot of LGBT people's lives. And here's a very, very annoying thing: the people, the ministers and the politicians go around saying that LGBT people have rights, they should be treated like citizens, but they shouldn't promote, they shouldn't be out there, they shouldn't be visible, right? What they are essentially doing is to say that they have appointed themselves to speak for LGBT people, but not allow LGBT people to speak for ourselves. So that is the kind of spaces that are closing on us.
But are they really speaking for the LGBT people? Because what they are also promoting is something. There's a lot of misconception. How can I don't know, because when I'm looking at the incident of taking down the photos of you and Nisha, how can a minister who is make that kind of direction, in what authority does he has to make that kind of direction? That's pretty interesting because of his portfolio, and I don't know. I don't know. That's very interesting that someone with his kind of portfolio can actually instruct another institution who is organizing that event to actually take down photos. That is pretty scary, I think. That is pretty scary. Yeah. So I don't know. Do you have something to add on in terms of this?
I think this also goes back to like the kind of discussions that we've been seeing in Parliament as well, right? So a lot of the questions about LGBT is sort of pushed to the Prime Minister's Department on Religious Affairs. So the understanding
But why so?
So I guess, again, I think there's a very narrow understanding of like what LGBT issues are and how to deal with it, right? Because currently, like if we look at the policies and practices by the government, it's important for us to know there are actual policies in place, right? For example, in July 2016, JAKIM, in collaboration with 22 government agencies, launched a 5-year action plan on addressing LGBT issues, and LGBT issues are framed as social ills, right? So, we don't know if like this 5-year plan is still being implemented, but we definitely do see an increase of like, activities by the government on like LGBT issues, right? And at the same time, if you looked at like Parliament debates and also just like reports in the media, it's very clear that, Fuzia Saleh actually said this in one of her interviews on Awani. The government's approach on LGBT issues, this is a continuation from the previous administration's policy, is to focusing on one, prevention, 2, rehabilitation and treatment, and 3, enforcement of laws, right? And we've seen like, and all of these things are really fundamentally, are inconsistent with our human rights guaranteed in the federal constitution, and also like international laws and other human rights standards, right? So I think some of the policies that we have in place at the moment is also like creating a lot of misinformation, misconception towards LGBT people.
I think Malaysians in general are very hopeful after the change of the administration. Do you think it has been better for the LGBT community in general? I know, we might not want to make this discussion very political, but it seems that there's always a political element in it. I'm not so sure. Because in a report by Guardian, you actually, I think you were quoted to say that this is like a state-sponsored homophobic or what is the right?
Homophobia and transphobia. I think I think for the advocacy that we've been doing, so, for example, I guess Justice for Sisters have always held the state accountable, right? Regardless whether it's Barisan Nasional or Pakatan Harapan.
And they have to be.
Yeah, and even in with the previous administration, in March 2018, Malaysia was reviewed by the CEDAW committee, right? And the CEDAW committee actually, in their recommendations, recommended that Malaysia takes, steps and measures to review policies, amend laws, and and also implement anti-bullying measures in schools because of the cases of bullying and violence in schools, right? So I think this is not a new conversation. These recommendations have been made, and these policies by the government have been reviewed by UN bodies and other bodies as well, and they also feel like these policies are inconsistent with human rights standards, right? So I don't know where am I going with this. Yeah, so basically I think what I'm trying to get at is that we've always been critical of the government, whether it is Barisan or Pakatan.
The new or the old
and for us, what is important is, what kind of harm are these policies, what kind of harm do these policies have on LGBT people and also other people, right? For example, conversion rehabilitation has already been, debunked and discredited by, the global health organizations, human rights, and all of that, right? So I think it has been discredited, and we also know it carries a lot of harm, right? In terms of depression, suicidal ideation, and it has many impacts that has been talked about. So for us, I think this is just bad policy making and bad investment, right? Because you're not only investing in discrimination now, but also you have to deal with the outcomes later, in terms of increased health risks, increased poverty, and increased unemployment, and many other things. So I think we also need to look at the economic cost of all of these policies as well, right? What kind of harm do they have short-term and long-term, not only on LGBT people, but also everybody?
Yeah, so, since you raised the point of rehabilitation, I think some people have that perception that, LGBT people could be cured. What do you guys have to say about that? You have mentioned that it has been debunked, but I think
I'm gonna let these people talk about this.
Yeah, because we need much more what you say. It's very big words, and even rehabilitating. It has to be translated into it can be cured, because some people really think that it could be cured. How would you respond to someone who tell you that you can be cured? Roll your eyes. Okay, that's.
You want to say something?
Yeah. Well, I grew up with this narrative, especially when you studied in a religious school, like Fang also, and come from very conservative family. You tell that you're wrong somehow, but I take it upon myself and actually investigate, all these sources of where they're coming from, and I for example, when it comes, they interpret from text, I don't share that same interpretation, and because as a gay man, I don't feel wrong, I just feel right?
Yeah.
But in the course of curing you, they constantly make you feel that you are in the wrong, right?
Of course, yeah. So how could straight understand what it's like to be gay or be bisexual, be lesbian, right? So that's why I thought about them. So as a teenagers, as a young person, I just okay, they don't know what they're talking about. I just navigate my life. But of course, when you grow up, increasingly you cannot put aside your sexuality or gender identity, all these rhetorics against it. You have to live your life, right?
Yes.
It brings impacts. It has discrimination. So in a way, then you have to speak out. You cannot just say, you cannot let go when people say that, you can be cured, you can be changed, you can, bring back to straight path. It brings psychological harm. It harms your self-esteem, and I have a lot of gay friends who, grew up not feeling confident about themselves, right? So So imagine a society where young people or LGBT people, they could not live to their full potential because other people said they are wrong.
Yes.
We want to live in that society. That's a question like that. Yeah.
And no, so actually because I was going through a Christian rehabilitation program myself for 10 years of my life, right?
There is actually a rehabilitation program.
Everywhere. I mean, no. So I joined. The one I joined was in Singapore, but there's also one in Malaysia. So I would say, what Numan said is very true. When I was going through this program, I really felt as if there's something fundamentally wrong with me, and that I don't deserve anything until I fix this part of my life. So I became. My studies fell back. I was quite a good student at one point. I was quite good, and then I lost interest in my study. I also lost interest in my career. So I aimed very low. And I did very little because I felt that as a gay man, I have nothing to contribute until I fix this part of my life. And it really slowed me down. In my life, my career, everything became secondary until this point. And once you do that, and you're constantly filled with shame and guilt because actually, if you have ever tried not thinking about it or something that is on your mind all the time, it gets worse, right? And it fills you with depression, it fills you with insecurity all the time, and you're always wondering whether people will find out, people will know, and on top of all the fear and the shame and the guilt, you just cripple. It just stunts your ability to do more in your life. And I tell my friend, if not for this, I of course maybe would have excelled in my career as an advertiser and gone into a big company now. And then my friend said, luckily homophobia saved you from capitalism. But I of course maybe I'm lucky, but in that way. But I would say that I consider myself lucky now. Because I managed to get out of it after 10 years, there are people who never come out of it because they've gone too far into it and they just have to keep pretending. And here's the thing, right? Once you tell a person there's something fundamentally wrong with them, right? And there's no way they can get rid of these feelings. So for 10 years, I tried not to fall in love. Can you imagine 10 years of your life, you like somebody, you think you have a chance at it? No, and then you kept telling yourself, you cannot fall in love, you don't deserve it, there's something wrong with you if you feel this way. It really does something to you. And I still, up to today, am scarred by this whole process of self-shaming and internalizing this homophobia. There are behavior that I do today that that makes me doubt myself because of those 10 years. Now the thing is, some of these people who then go through this, once they realize they cannot change, what do? They learn to pretend. They learn to mask it. They learn to lie. Then once they lie, they deceive others. It becomes so natural. But here's where it gets really ugly, because once in a while you get a controversy, somebody's lives get exposed, somebody gets outed, somebody gets shamed, and becomes so seedy, the sensational headlines everywhere, how this person cheated on and his wife with another man and things like that. But what have we done? We have actually trained him from young to be deceitful, to lie, and to pretend.
Yes.
Well, I don't know.
No, it's very scarring. What am I trying to say?
It is.
And it stays. I mean, there are parts of me now, right, that I don't know how to undo because of those years in which I keep convincing myself that I'm worthless.
Do you think it's easier for the younger generation now to be more truthful to themselves? Because I actually noticed there are a lot of people, a lot of gay men in their 40s that came out or maybe have like same-sex affairs, but they are married. I don't know, is this a generational thing, or maybe for the younger ones it's easier for them to be themselves?
Well, the younger ones probably is easier, not because they're young, obviously. It's because we live in a more interconnected world. Social media easier. You know, when I'm trying to feel belong, you know, I search for a group, and in the back of my mind, I know, okay, there's this thing that called Seksualiti Merdeka, and I tried to look it up on Facebook, and that's when they have a Facebook group, and then that's why I contacted Pang, and okay, there's a whole community, and you feel belong, and this story is also like a lot of other young people. They also like that. They go on Twitter. They saw that, you know, there are apps that, you know, get them to meet each other. You don't feel alone anymore. That's why I think some young people, they're free to express themselves without, maybe because they are privileged of, you know, having family that's, you know, very accepting, but also maybe because they know there are other people. The very fact that you know there are other people out there who's like you is liberating, I think.
And actually, for me, I mean, we all have different point of focus for our activism, but for me, this is the critical part for me, to be able to create a community, a sense of family for young people for whom society has stripped them away from all the resources, the emotional resources that other children have access to. You know, when you're growing up, you get bullied, you get depressed. It's normal, I mean, everyone gets
You've normalized it.
It's not.
Sure.
But
growing up, we go through a lot of roughness, let's say. And a lot of people could either count on their family or their siblings, you know, or their close friends. But when you're growing up gay or LGBT, right, you were suddenly told that you can't trust anyone. So when you're having emotional issues, when you're having depression, when you're so vulnerable already to be isolated and feeling alone, and then have no one you can trust, not even your family, to turn to, you're cut off from the ability to overcome, right? So when you're cut off from the ability to heal and overcome, you also don't learn to overcome, and these things stay in you, you know, the negativity stays in you, and so I feel that a lot of LGBT people actually grow up being denied the same emotional resources that everybody else gets. And what we want to do is to be able to create a sense of community to feed back some of these things that have been denied to us. And even then, we cannot. We are not allowed to.
Yeah, since we are talking about your personal stories and what the effort that has been done, initiatives that has been initiated by the community itself, but has the system or is the law protective of the LGBT community? Because according to our law, everyone is equal before the law.
So I think we need to really interrogate what we mean by everybody is you know, equal before the law, right? Of course, the federal constitution says, you know, we all have, you know, Article 5 to 13, you know, outlines our fundamental rights from freedom of movement, equality before the law, non-gender discrimination, and things like that. But
you can just rattle it out these days, you know.
But at the same time, we also see there are other laws, right? Like, for example, under the, you know, you have the Penal Code 377, which is not a law that directly criminalizes LGBT people, but it criminalizes sexual acts, right? It's gender neutral. But at the same time, I also want to note that, you know, the impact of this law is that, you know, LGBT people are disproportionately vulnerable to extortion, blackmail, you know, and other things, right? So there's also the indirect impact and the chilling effect of these laws on the LGBT communities. And then you also have Sharia laws that, you know, criminalize sexual orientation, gender identity, and transgender people and gender expression. Like, for example, you know, there was a case of the caning of 2 lesbians for attempted musahaka, right? So this is something that we are seeing right now as well. And, you know, these 2 people were sentenced to fine and 6 strokes of cane. And then there are also you know, other laws that are used against against people, right? So I think the legal framework in Malaysia is already quite discriminatory, which then has a huge impact on the way that we access other rights, right? For example, because there's a climate of criminalization, there are laws against us, it's very difficult for LGBT people to go and report cases of like sexual violence or extortion or blackmail, you know, because by going to the police station to say that, oh, I've been extorted because of X, Y, and Z, you're also outing yourself and opening yourself up for maybe further persecution. So then it creates this like, you know, it just creates more barriers for people to like access other rights, right? For example, like we talked about freedom of assembly, association, you know. So clearly, you know, LGBT people have very little freedom of association, assembly, right? And this is also directly linked to the legal framework and policies that we see. So in that sense, there's a chilling effect and, you know, domino effect on other rights. So in that sense, we need to also ask ourselves, what does this, if everybody is equally protected under the law and everybody is guaranteed, you know, non-discrimination, freedom of movement, is this accorded to like LGBT people? Do LGBT people feel, you know, safe in schools? You know, are LGBT people disproportionately affected by, you know, hiring policies at the employment sector, right? Like, for example, we know a lot of transgender people face discrimination in the employment sector, right? And also face huge kind of discrimination in the education sector. Like, as a researcher, like, you know, we've done a lot of documentation that shows that, you know, transgender women especially are completely vulnerable to sexual harassment and sexual violence in educational institutions. Of course, LGBT people across the board are also vulnerable, right? So, you know, in this sense, when we talk about equality and like protection, we need to look at like, you know, do LGBT people have all access to these places, right? And can we, you know, exercise our rights without any kind of fear or persecution?
Yeah, you mentioned something about discrimination at workplace or educational institution. I don't know, but maybe Numan, because I asked you before the show, would you want to, you know, share a little bit about your experience? You know, some of our audience would have known that, you know, you have to resign for a position in the Ministry of Sports. Yes. Would you like to care to share a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so, well, what happened to me is not like exclusive to me. We have had cases where other LGBT people were forced to resign or fired because on the ground of their sexual orientation or gender identity, because there's no anti-discrimination law in this country. So if you're fired because of your sexuality, you cannot go. There's no, you know,
recourse to it. So because I'm active, you know, I organize for LGBT community. People make it an issue on social media about my appointment in the ministry. They said that, you know, how could someone like me make policy about youth in this country? So, of course, that's discriminatory, right? That's, it is.
Of course, from the ministry's team themselves, we've been working since early this year, so I never experienced like discrimination amongst my colleagues, that's for sure. But when you're in political office, it's not just the colleague that you need to deal with, it's also the general public, your political opponents that you have to take care of. So in that sense, I'm not protected. So that's, you know, if other things would happen to me, you know, I don't think they would face the same problem like I did. You know, I don't think they have no problem, you know, staying on as, you know, as to work in a government office. So,
but you have to resign not because of your ability to perform. You know, that's very sad. You know, looking at this, right, for someone who has, I mean, among the three of you guys, for someone who have been in the political space, do you think that we can see one day that we have a representative in the parliament from the LGBT community?
I'm very
for sure.
optimistic.
Yeah,
I'm very optimistic.
optimistic. I hope so. Why not?
No, I mean, yeah.
Because Malaysia as a country, we as a society we are very diverse.
Yes, we are.
We are not homogeneous, right? We've learned to live with that. The question is whether we wanted to extend that diversity to people who live at the margin. It's not just LGBT community, the orang asli, the refugees, you know. So I think Malaysians need to also understand that people live in the margin also need representation.
Yes.
In political, in
All spaces.
all spaces. In policy making especially, because there are policies that are being designed that affects us without us being there, without being consulted. So I think sooner or later people will like, okay, we have to give space. I hope so. I don't. So yeah.
And also, I think it's important for people to be able to imagine
Yes.
things.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to restrict people's imaginations, right? Like, so kids and just people across age should be able to think that they can do whatever that they want to do if they set their minds to it, right? Not in a harmful way.
Yes.
I'm not saying that, but you know, you should be able to dream and like, you know, if you desire to be something, go for it.
Yeah.
And actually, the point is, I think a lot of LGBT people have already been contributing and making a lot of difference in the country, right? From, I'm sure, working in media, maybe the studio itself, to the parliament, to people, to the janitors of our country, to drivers, to engineers, to CEOs. LGBT people are contributing where they are, where they can, and sometimes we just want to be able to contribute more, because when you are actually living in fear of being outed or losing it all that you have worked for, it actually also takes away your mental space from focusing at the work that you're doing. You know, and here's the thing that really, I think, underscores for me why people don't understand what we are facing. A lot of people are actually trying to tell me, where is the discrimination that LGBT people face? So they use that example I just gave. Well, a lot of you have jobs. In fact, a lot of my gay friends have very well-paid jobs. You know, you see a lot of very flamboyant characters on TV. So it must mean that it's okay, right? And then they also go on and say things like, I'm not homophobic. I will never hurt a LGBT person, but I don't support them. So this tells me that actually Malaysia doesn't understand what discrimination is, and so when they are practicing discrimination, they don't realize they are doing it. The fact is, they think that as long as they are not going around kicking a gay person on the street, they are not discriminating, they are not homophobic, right? We set a very low bar for this defining what discrimination is. And at the same time, LGBT people, because of being trained from young to either be undercover or whatever, right? We have also normalized. We have found ways to survive and compromise and bargain with the conditions of our lives, in order to survive. And so we also don't see the discrimination. We don't call it discrimination because we don't recognize it as discrimination. And so we think it's okay. But actually, there are a lot of discrimination. The number one discrimination is the fact that people can openly say things like, I'm not homophobic, I won't punch you in the face, but I won't support you. The fact that people can go around saying, I don't support you, and by doing so, shut off the spaces from you being able to represent yourself and speak and talk about what you want and how you want to belong, is discrimination. That is fundamentally discrimination. You are denying people the ability to tell you if they are being discriminated.
Actually, I think most of those people who make the statement that I do not support you, it's just that they cannot accept you, and they do not make that, connection that when you don't accept someone, then you are actually discriminating someone. I don't know. That's my personal view, I think. But yeah. Okay. Actually, there is some question. Okay.
Oh, people are watching.
Yes.
Exciting.
The last time I interviewed Asmi Sharom, he was like saying he can't believe that somebody is watching, and after that the questions keep on.
I will watch Asmi Sharom.
Yeah, I understand.
He's very
Okay,
watching.
so there is this. Okay, let me see. So, okay, Dak. I think he asked two questions.
I think we know who that deck is.
Oh, all right. Okay. There are one thing. Can the speakers talk about state-sponsored violence or whatever the government has done to LGBT issues? And then the second question is, in LGBT movement, what's the biggest challenge? These are the two things. Who's going to take it first?
Okay, I can talk about the state-sponsored violence. So I think, like, when we talk about state-sponsored, I just want to maybe give a definition. What we mean is state-endorsed, right, or state-funded activities that cause harm to like LGBT people, right? So in this sense, we have looked at. So like I said earlier, the current government's policies are focused on these three things, which are like, prevention, which includes like counseling programs and early prevention in childhood, so seminars, talking to parents, going to schools and things like that. So I think the different government agencies have been organizing this. And then you have rehabilitation and treatment, which then there's a therapy program that has been developed by Jakim, I think. And then you also have this Mukayam program, which is a spiritual camp that is organized for LGBT people, and it was introduced in 2010 or 2011. And this program, it provides microcredit assistance, gives information on HIV and AIDS, but the long-term plan is also for people to change, or it takes an abstinent approach to abandon their the objective of one of the objectives is also for people to abandon their lifestyles, right? So this is one, and then you also have enforcement of laws, so that includes the laws that are in place, and also other measures that have been introduced, right? For example, we've heard statement in the past 100 days about how social media content, LGBT-related social media content, is monitored by Jakim and MCMC. When in fact, the reality is we see a lot of people being outed, receiving hateful, degrading comments, and have actually very little avenues to seek redress, right? So this sort of surveillance and monitoring only exacerbates this situation and limits access to justice for a lot of LGBT people. And then we also have heard, this. We do not condone LGBT lifestyle sort of conversations, right? So the fact that we're using LGBT lifestyle itself is problematic because it's not like I'm at I have a membership to the Royal Club and then like I get 30% off with every new purchase of rainbow flag and like groceries at like cold storage, right? So it's not that, right? So it's not so it trivializes our identity, right? So that itself is a problem. And then, so I think, and we've also seen the impact of this, like, with the removal of the portraits and things like that. So, and then also, I think in terms of enforcement of laws, we've also seen the Operasi Bah, right? Like, which was the Bantras Activity Haram. Curbing sinful activities. So, and this was also targeted, and in some of the statements they talked about how, the operation is to curb LGBT movement that is radical and growing or something.
In a club.
Yeah. So I think we have, these are some of the things that we have seen in the new administration, and we've also seen like at least one seminar organized everywhere. So these are some, state-funded programs that actually have high impact, right? Like in terms of what we talked about earlier, because our concern is that this increases misinformation, and it has long-term impact in terms of, the kind of rhetoric that we've been seeing in the media for the past 100 days.
Yes.
We usually check in with, the trans community and LGBT people, and we've also seen shifts in family, right, in terms of tolerance and acceptance. Not all parents are like accepting, right? They tolerate your behavior, or like, there's a don't ask, don't tell. And all of this rhetoric and things that we are seeing in the media is also shifting a lot of acceptance within the family. People are also facing job discrimination. People, trans people who are entrepreneurs, who are businesswomen, are facing boycotts, right? And losing clients. And this actually has an impact. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I just want to jump in on that point you're making also about how basically at the end of it, the government is trying to also say, but as long as you stay private, everything will be fine. Don't make it public, don't glamorize, don't promote.
Glamorize was the word.
Yeah, well, promoting also our lifestyle, right? And so on one hand, they are sponsoring all these activities, right? And on the other hand, they are telling us keep it private and then you'll be fine. But the fact is, if you are telling us to keep it private, but at the same time, you're teaching our families to identify, curb, and punish us and our children, then you are actually leaving us at the mercy of people who are exacting this kind of violence on us. So you're actually creating a space in privacy where violence can happen to LGBT people out of sight and out of view of the public. And like exactly what happened to women who are victims of domestic or survivors of domestic violence, right? The private space is where most of the violence happens, and a lot of times LGBT people experience all these things: extortion, blackmailing, bullying at a very high level, precisely because the people who do these things to us know they can get away with it because we have no space to talk about it. No one will believe us when we talk about it, and we won't dare to tell anyone about it because telling people about it could mean outing ourselves, right? So in other words, the government has created a perfect space within which criminals can commit crimes against LGBT people and get away with it. And that's the kind of violence as well.
To jump in his point on privacy, when has there ever been privacy in Malaysia, right? We always see coward raid in people's homes and every day almost, right? So where is this private space that they're talking about?
In fact, only maybe 0.1% of the population live in that kind of a gated community of a bungalow where you can actually
5-star hotel
afford really private spaces. I mean, but the rest of us don't have that kind of luxury to live in that kind of privacy. Yeah, we have neighbors, we have families, we have friends, and our lives are constantly under surveillance.
Yeah. So I think the other thing that I want to add is, and I mentioned this earlier, like when we talk about state-sponsored violence, or state-sponsored homophobia and transphobia, right? It's also really important for the state to look at what is the impact of this in the long run, right? Because when you invest in these programs now, which is you invest in these programs that are not consistent with human rights, and also you already know it's been discredited, and it's it has long-term impact, right? So then the government is also in a position where it has to manage the consequences and the outcomes of these programs, these manifestations of these programs, right? So for example, because of the rhetoric that we've been seeing like for the past how many years, we are also seeing an increase of hate crime, right?
Yes.
And violence against trans women and gender non-conforming people. And this now has to be, the state has to manage this.
Yeah.
Hate crime is something that now it's a new thing that the state has to manage. And hate speech, right? Like, for example, the amount of hate speech and discriminatory speech that we are seeing online is a manifestation of this environment, right? So these are new problems and new issues that, the state has to manage as well. So here's the thing, right? When you invest in bad policies that is not in consultation with LGBT people who are directly impacted by these policies, then you're also like, you're going to have these outcomes, like harmful outcomes, terrible outcomes, which later manifest into different problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I know, it makes sense. And I think some people are also very skeptical about whether some bad laws that actually it's harmful to the LGBT community is going away, because we have the Deputy Prime Minister talking about the Section 377. It's only an exceptional case when it was used against her husband. But I'm sure you guys know that it has been used against much more people. I'm not so sure because...
it has been, because I think the statistics...
He's not the one. He's not the only one.
So the statistics, there are statistics to show that, more people have been... but he's probably the, one person
most prominent one.
Yeah.
When I say that the questions will be flowing in, there are 4 in line.
Oh, wow.
We will talk about the LGBT movement, the challenge of LGBT movement in a later stage. But okay, let's start with this.
Oh, wow.
This is, I don't know, will the decreasing non-Muslim population in Malaysia affect the LGBT community from getting their rights?
Maybe the token Muslim.
Can I say? Oh, no, go for it.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't think so. I think this might be coming from a presumption that Muslim community in all of them are against LGBT. It's not the case. You see Turkey, India, they are very homophobic now.
Yeah.
But originally, when
not like that.
if you look at Tunisia or Albania, there are countries where Muslim majority country where LGBT community can live better than us here in Malaysia. So that's, I think, partly answer that question. But I think maybe you want to add up to that.
So I think there are a few things that I want to address with this. I think migration is a big issue that is happening with Muslim or non-Muslim, who have people of whatever religious beliefs, right? And I think, so it's important to note that. And also, like what Numan said, even in Malaysia, not all Muslim people are against LGBT people. There are many family members, allies that we know who are really supportive. And also, I think, it's also important when we talk about rights, we need everybody to come together, right?
Yeah.
So whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, discrimination is discrimination. We all have to speak up against like patriarchy and all forms of discrimination, right? So yeah.
No, I mean, excellent point, because a lot of this kind of questions we hear a lot, because I think people fall into the trap of the discourse of the country at large, which is always racial. Everything in Malaysia is about race, okay? So, and we all religion, and we're always dividing ourselves along that line. But here's the thing that I strongly believe. I mean, as a non-Muslim, I have also stood up for the rights of Muslims before, right? Especially, when they are affected by big corporations or discriminations in other places, or even Islamophobia, right? We have done that. And just the same as we have seen our Muslim friends in the civil society who have stood up for our rights. I think it's possible. People just need to stop thinking that because there are opposition to this right, then they cannot speak up. If you believe that people deserve right that they are not being given, if you see injustice anywhere, you need to speak up. You need to stand up for what is right. And if you feel afraid or that you're going to be outnumbered, there are others like you. Find the community, create that community, hold hands, stand up together.
Let the voice be heard. But okay, I think back to the previous question just now, right? I think that question, I'm not so sure, I'm guessing, maybe it's also like a global Islamization trend where people are moving towards the more conservative narrative of...
But that's like right-wing politics,
Yes,
right? It's not
yes.
just Islam. You know, there are so many crazy people. I mean, sorry. I mean, there are so many people with like different views.
Yes, yes,
We are living in an age of populism as well. So it's,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean,
So you don't think that that's the only opposition, that opposing voiced Islam is not only the opposing voice?
No, I think
of
that's a
LGBT?
misconception.
I think actually there are a lot. I mean, just as there are actually a lot of LGBT people who are religious, who have faith in their own religion,
Yes.
whatever they are. There are also a lot of people within religion who wants to see change in the way their faith is being practiced and institutionalized. And I think we need to make those voices heard. We need to amplify them. We need to show solidarity. We also need to stop thinking that we need to stop the kind of discourse also that kind of dismiss people with faith, because I sometimes see people do that, and I think no, people with faith have a lot of them are actually trying to find ways of changing their system from within, and we need to empower them.
Okay. All right. Maybe the next question then, this one, I think, it's very
Hi,
proactive.
Jade.
Jade, do you know her again?
We don't know this person.
Okay, how can non-LGBT people help support the community?
Amplify our voices, listen, amplify, collaborate with us to create spaces. We have spaces for you, you have spaces for us. The equality that we seek comes when we stand in the same space and we give each other the same respect to occupy that space together. And I think a lot of times what I really resent are when non-LGBTQ people try to tell me where's the discrimination. Look, I accept all my friends, so you don't have a problem too. It's not for you to tell me whether I have a problem or not. It is for me to tell you. So listen, and then together we can create the spaces where we address these problems together. Because the problem doesn't just affect me; it will affect you. It will affect your family, your friends. I mean, it's all of us together, right? So I think we need to create more things together, create culture together, and if non-LGBT people become afraid of speaking up alone, as I mentioned earlier, and this is very real. I mean, this is why I think a lot of our parents are also subjected to the same social force, and then they end up kicking their children out because they are afraid that if society knows that they have an LGBT child, the family itself will get isolated and marginalized, right? So yes, I understand it's frightening to be doing this alone, but you are not alone. That we are here. We can do it together.
Do you both have anything to add on? No one?
That summarizes it. Give spaces for us.
Okay, so the next one is very specific. How can LGBT teenagers and children be better protected from the harms of society? What can members of society do to help with efforts? Well, you mentioned that, voice out and give them the space.
And also, I think, parents and family members who are watching or I think it's important for parents and family members to understand that your child is normal. Your sibling is not, there's nothing wrong. You are fine just the way you are. There's nothing that you need to change, right? So I think it's important to just, like what Pang said, right? These are very simple things, right? It's active listening. And it applies with all communities, right? We don't want to speak over others. So I do encourage parents and family members to just really listen and support your child, because that would do wonders, right?
Well, in my work, we, every month we receive cases where teenagers, young people that were kicked out from their homes, from their family because of their sexuality or gender identity. So I think I echo what Glaga said. I mean, listen to child, for God's sake, right? And they're still your child, and make space for them. It's easy to to freak out, right? But you need to listen and and not emotion gets in the way of moving forward together as a family, I think.
And I want to tell parents, don't be afraid. And in fact, as Tilaga pointed out, don't just accept one view. Go and read up and find that you will find that there are many views, and then you can pick and choose, right? The views that work the best for you to protect your child. I want to say this thing. I know that a lot of times, especially mothers, they're conditioned to think that their spaces only belong at home. Right? I mean, or that they can only protect their children by making the homes safer for their children. And so, of course, they're worried. Okay, if you're gay, you'll get bullied, you'll get beaten up, whatever. So don't be gay. As if that would solve the problem, right? But I want to encourage parents who have this concern. Then you need to think that the only way to protect your child sometimes is to make the country safer, not just your home.
Yes.
Go out. Get organized. Don't be afraid. Look for each other. There's a community of parents out there, I'm sure, who are willing to stand with you and create these changes where you are. I have a very beautiful story from Vietnam, right?
Yes.
There was they're starting to talk about changing the laws in Vietnam, and then there was this this meeting between some parents from the PFLAG, which is Parents Friends of Lesbians and Gays.
Okay.
It's an organization, and they are from Vietnam, and they're all over the world, but there's one in Vietnam, and they had a meeting with the generals in Vietnam, and then there were doctors there and human rights activists. And suddenly, one of the doctors was saying something like, the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the Psychiatric Association have kind of removed homosexuality as a mental illness, and says it's normal and all right. And then the general says, yeah, we know that. And then one of the mother got so angry with the general. She said, you knew this? You knew this for all these years and you didn't tell us, and you make me think there's something wrong with my son, and you created this conflict in my family, in my home. All these years I was trying to punish and make my son correct, and you knew this and you didn't tell me. How dare you? I think parents can afford to be angrier at the government and not their children for the lies and the misinformation that they have been told about their children and the harm that they're doing to their children. I think it's gross that that parents are turning on their own children. If they can direct the anger outward and organize themselves and make the country safer for the children, that will make a difference.
Because I was actually...
Sorry, I got carried away.
No, I was actually... I had the opportunity to meet a few parents from, all over the globe. And, there's really wonderful parents who are I met a mother from Japan who actually goes to school to do education on, LGBT diversity and inclusion.
Oh, okay.
And, that's, really heartwarming,
yes,
right?
It is.
And also, recently I was at a conference and there were, 20 parents 20 to 30 parents who actually came forward and said that, we apologize for hurting you. I don't even know these people, and I was crying with the whole room, right? Because it was just really, really emotional to hear some, parents say things like that, right? So I think this can also happen in Malaysia, right?
It is happening already.
Yeah.
The parents who are doing
exactly.
that,
And I think these are the things that we should look forward to, right? Like parents coming together, people coming together, being in solidarity.
One immediate thing that they can do is pick up a PTA. Parents Teachers Association in school, they have gathering. Parents have to speak out about protecting school children, from bullying. That's the most important thing, because we heard cases where, youngsters, teenagers in schools being bullied because of gender identity of their appearance, of their...
And being bullied by their teachers as well.
Yes.
So we actually have a survey that we did last year, and we actually had about 170 respondents, and out of that, 46 people actually said yes, that they have experienced discrimination, violence in school, and 27% said maybe. Again, this goes to being able to identify discrimination or not, right? So in total, 73% actually said that they have experienced some form of discrimination, aggression, violence in school.
In school. This is very interesting because Numan has just brought us to the next question by another audience. Could you tell us what kinds of amendment of law could be made to stop school bullying based on sexual orientation, gender identity and expression? How do you respond to DPM says haram as a Muslim to support LGBT?
That's two questions, right?
Quietness.
So two questions, right?
Yeah, there are two questions actually.
So I think in terms of school policies, so there are a few things that needs to be amended, right? One is the school guidelines, because I think in the school guidelines, homosexuality and kecelaruan gender is seen as a serious offense. And also in some cases for homosexuality and kecelaruan gender, which is gender confusion, the students can be also subjected to corporal punishment, right?
Kick out from school as well.
Be suspended and kicked out of, expelled from school.
We use, I'm very ignorant about this. School guidelines meaning...
So these are school guidelines that are...
Tata tertib sekolah.
Yeah, issued by the...
Ministry,
Ministry?
No, state...
School themselves and state...
State education department,
But generally it's applicable to schools all over Malaysia?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think there are also some directives about Morotan and all
But
that.
every school they have their own tata tertib guidelines. So also in that you have to look, when if you found to have sex, same sex, you can get kicked out from schools.
Because in my days, I don't think that's in my school rules. I'm not so sure.
Or maybe you weren't reading the school rules.
Maybe I've always been ignoring it.
So I think there's a school guideline that, that's one. And also I think, recently we talked about school textbook and curriculum, which also then, I think in the Pengajian Am textbook, apparently there's some soji sexual orientation, gender identity is talked about, and not in an affirming way, I think. I don't know entirely what it says exactly, but but we know that it's not affirming. So there's also that, and also I think to stop bullying, for sure, I think it's not about punishing the bullies. But it's about educating people, right? Really raising awareness about what is sexual orientation, what is gender identity, teaching respect, right? Because a lot of times, I think people come from a very ignorant place as well, and very misinformed place, right? So it's also important for us to provide this education to people, to say that human beings are diverse, and this is just part of life, right? Diversity is part of life. So I think those things are important, and also I think, of course, I also think it's important to have non-discrimination provision and anti-bullying provisions in schools, and to also educate school teachers and counselors to be more affirming when they actually provide support for LGBT students. Not to victim blame, or to be affirming when talking to students.
So the second part of the question?
I don't think she actually said the phrase that way, and it was actually the headline that says it that way. So what she actually said was that LGBT is haram, and therefore, as a Muslim, she cannot condone it. Which is similar, but not exactly what she said. So I mean, or not what that phrase says. So I think that's of course not true. You know, I know a lot of people who would challenge it because it's a matter of interpretation. And I don't want to be in a place to tell people how to interpret their religious texts. Yeah? But I want to also encourage people to recognize that there are many interpretations of texts, of faith, of these things. And in fact, there was a time when it was halal to support slavery, when it was halal to support beating up your wives, and we don't agree with that anymore, So I think just because something seems to be halal or haram at a particular time, and I wouldn't even use the word halal or haram. I just want to say, even in the Bible, for example, there were times when people used the Bible to defend a lot of things, slavery and murder and all that. But they don't do that anymore because people have investigated and tried to find more compassionate ways of reading their faith, so that it makes more sense to them personally, and it allows them to create a society that is more equitable, that is more compassionate.
Can I? Sorry, do you want to? I guess the one to unpack. One is, I think, of course, all religion believes in, the cornerstone of all religion is social justice and human dignity, right? Like, I think all religion talks about that, and Islam also does that, right? I think here I would say, to politicians that, so on one hand, these are policymakers, right? Policymakers need to be very careful, and people in places of influence. So I think while people may hold certain views, religious views or whatever cultural views that they have, but as policymakers, you need to create that separation. It's important for people to, look at what are the actual problems and issues and what are the needs and gaps in society, right? Because LGBT people are a population, and these are also your constituents, right? And if we are looking at all the sustainable development goals, making Malaysia a developed country and all of that, if one population is left behind, there is no way you can have sustainable development, right? Because you will always be dealing with poverty, crime, and all of those things, and health, increased health risks and all of that. So I think here, whatever your personal beliefs are, and as also, one Aziza is someone who's familiar with medical ethics as well, where, if, as a doctor, you need to separate yourself, right? If you can't provide whatever services, you then refer the patient to someone else. So I think here politicians and policymakers must also have must practice this ethics, right? Because they are looking at addressing the gaps in society. That's their role. It's not to make, public sermons or to preach or to give unsolicited advice. The role is to address gaps in society. What are the issues? It's very clear, based on a lot of reports, that LGBT people face discrimination. So how are we addressing this discrimination?
Yeah. Numan, do you have anything to add on this one, this question?
I think they have said something, and then they have already said things that,
you wanted to say.
Yeah. I mean, not by default that it's haram. I mean, maybe you should investigate more on that, read more on that. I think,
Yeah. Okay. I think we have one question. I think it's a very good question to end our discussion today. NH, what are the future for LGBT community here in Malaysia?
Do you want to go first, Numan? We've been talking a lot.
Yeah, correct.
You go for it.
Well, this is what we think, right? The question.
Yeah,
of course.
I can imagine a progressive future, where all people, including LGBTQ LGBTQ community are included in society in all spaces, in all walks of life. So that's why I believe that's what I wanted to work on, because a progressive Malaysia means a happier Malaysians.
Yes, of course.
So I think that's future for us. We have to stand up, obviously, to fight for that future. In this first Merdeka, in the first regime change in history, I think we proved that the impossible can happen. I don't think it's far-fetched to say that, a more affirming, a more inclusive Malaysia is possible. Yeah.
Very hopeful.
Yeah.
What do you have to say, Tilaga?
I agree with Numan. I really think it's important for everybody to be able to imagine, right? For orang asli folks to imagine that there'll be no they can still have their blockades and they will, get the tanah adat and all of that, right? I mean, we should all be able to imagine stuff. I do think, but I also don't think, we should just imagine and hope and whatever, right? It's also important to work at it, to educate ourselves, to come, like what Pang said, come together, build communities, and all of these things to, if you imagine something, you got to work at it, right?
Of course,
Yeah. And there are people who are working at it, so people should connect and start organizing and stuff.
Just to build on what Tilaga said, I think LGBT people all over Malaysia can also imagine the kind of future they want. And yes, some of the steps required to reach that future is difficult. Then find what are the steps you need to take that is safe for you to take now. Take that step first, right? For example, maybe you want to be more involved, then join a volunteer organization, go help the refugees, help the poor, help the homeless, the people with disabilities. There are many ways for you to be involved in building this nation. Be involved. Don't listen to them asking you to stay private, because then you're cutting off yourself. That will isolate you, and when you face problems, you have no one to turn to. Create the community where you can, because the community is already there. If that's not there, then you make the community, right? We are all not, we all don't have the same connection, but we all can do something. Because this is one of the things I try to tell people, yes, maybe you're not out to your parents now,
Yes.
right? But if you, and you're not ready, but if you can imagine one day in the future that you can be out to your parents, what is that going to be like, right? If you can picture that, then imagine if you were, or if you cannot picture that, then imagine what will you have to say if you were outed to them, right? Because one day we could be outed as well. If you are outed, what can you say? What do you want to say? So if you can already imagine what are the things you're prepared to say, then you are also able to imagine how you defend your life and your right to exist. Once you have those words, once you have the language, you have taken the first step towards creating that future and that space for yourself.
Very nice. Actually, I wanted to ask you guys to say some words of encouragement to the LGBT community, since I think it's very hard time now. But our audience have done my work very nicely. So thank you so much, folks, for being here on this very significant day. Happy Merdeka. I hope this is all we working together towards a better Malaysia.
Let's hope.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
各位观众朋友，多谢你们今晚的收看。我不知道说今天的节目能不能够让大家更理解这个 LGBT 社群所面对的问题，但是我希望说这可以推动我们更理解他们，也推动一个更平等的社会，让马来西亚成为一个更好的国家。我们再会，晚安。